Glad to be here, and we're basically segueing into Catherine's last, session, and we're going to try to build on that a little bit and give you some practical knowledge of what we do and what you need to do when it comes to planning a library, whether it's a new construction or a remodel or repurposing a pre-existing buildings. So we're going to try to cover all these. We're going to cover so much and just kind of dabble here and there. And if you have any specific questions at the end, we'll try to leave some time to answer that.
I think if you guys have questions as well, you can just raise your hands if you do have a question during.
Well, actually,
I'm sorry. Did you want to do?
No.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. So there's a couple of things being library designers. We continuously get the question, will we need physical libraries in the future? And I think that you guys all know that we will continue to have libraries, whatever they look like. They might have less books, less physical books, but they will always be an important part of the community. So a lot of the things that impact this, so we're talking about emerging technologies, obviously. Again, something that you guys have touched on. Societal trends. This depends a lot on your community. And also other factors, so your demographics of your community too. So there's a lot of different shifts that we're looking at during that.
We're looking at trendiness and timeliness, and certainly, that's one of the things that we have to involve ourselves in with trends. I mean, colors change and trend, and even styles of architecture trend. But so that's always something that we deal with, and we're always trying to design buildings that are timeless, and the trendiness isn't quite as apparent. But anyway, just reading these, today's library is so many things. It's a library as gathering place, as museum, as park, as school, as community center. It's really just acknowledging that libraries do a heck of a lot more than they used to do, and we have seen it. So in my 40 years of designing libraries, we designed libraries the old-fashioned way, where it was designed around the book, designed around the stacks. Very minimal programming, and areas for staff, but that was important. But otherwise, they've changed so much since then, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Next quote is, trends can be a hurdle, and typically a 2 or 3 lifespan for most of those. And once the newness wears off, what do? Well, you got to change, or you just live with it. So the best thing that you can do as a library designer is to design with flexibility and adaptability for the future.
And we are going to show you guys some examples as well while we're going through these. So you can see in this photo, for example, there's a lot of different finishes that are a little bit more on that trendy side. We're seeing a lot more color and things like that. Those are easier to change as we go through. What we're focused on, too, is making sure that you have spaces that are adaptable, talking about the furniture and things like that as we move into programming.
And so what is future-proofing? So we're going to be talking a lot about this. Could you do the next slide, please? Another quote, but I think it's another really apropos quote. Some sources define the future-proofing as planning that makes something unlikely to become obsolete. That is so good, because that is what we're always trying to do, especially for new libraries. I think 20, 30, 40 years ago, we weren't thinking that. And so the next one is, let's see, many of the definitions described anticipating change and then planning for it. What about the changes that can't be anticipated? And this is a great one. That's why I highlighted. In the 70s, nobody saw those computers coming, and none of the library designers could have even anticipated that. So in probably the late 1980s or so, a guy named Steve Jobs and another one, what's his name, with Microsoft, started doing things that just changed the environment with which we worked in. And of course, there was a lot of talk back then, libraries are going to be obsolete. The book is going away. We won't need books anymore because Al Gore invented the internet. so it's like, my gosh, so what does that mean? And we had a lot of clients that was wondering, how is that going to impact, the buildings that we design? And what are we going to do? Are they going to get smaller? Are they going to go away? Or, what happens to us? And there was some public or community comments that we received that pretty much believed in that. But I think the silent majority dispelled all that, and we were able to say, hey, books aren't going away. And I think we found that as well. So that we're not changing that much, but we are evolving. So we learned from the past. We know that libraries aren't just repositories for books anymore. They're just not for stacks, and they're not designed around the almighty book. The book is still important, but we have so many areas that we need to design for people, for collaboration, especially for not only staff, but obviously our patrons and all age groups that come into the libraries now.
So learning from our past, we're really thinking about what the changing needs and expectations are of library users, and really thinking about what those programming spaces are, right? So we've moved from this very book-focused to more person-focused, and now we're going into community-focused. And I think some of the things that we've talked about earlier as well, like we really don't know what the future holds. So we're continuously just trying to think of like what could be the next thing, and how do we build a building that is adaptable for those uses.
I think this is working pretty good. Let's see, the future. Well, okay, let's grab our crystal balls and see what we can find. But basically, we know that we have to have buildings that can accommodate all kinds of services and technology. They have to be flexible for these new little spaces we call maker spaces that have to have CNC machines, 3D printers, media tech spaces for broadcasting and things like that. So we are creating all these spaces that just are infused with technology and more power. We found another thing too, that gee whiz, everybody's bringing their devices to the library, and we don't have enough outlets for them to plug in, to recharge the batteries. So we need to accommodate that as well. So the third bullet there, the evolution of libraries. We've seen great changes in the last 20 years in particular, and so we know that they're not a static entity or facility anymore. They have to be designed for change in the future. And how do we do that? Oh, adaptability, adaptable versatility. Those are kind of our new buzzwords in design, and so we're always thinking about that. And so when you start working with an architect that knows how to design libraries, you're going to hear that a lot. Let's not design something that's going to be in the way of versatility. In other words, don't put something really expensive like restrooms in the middle of a space. That's not going to work very well, and it's going to be expensive, very, very expensive to move. Next.
Okay, so you guys know all of that information, right? That's stuff that you deal with every day. So we're going to talk a little bit about the features of a future-proof library. So this really focuses on your people. So that's the civic engagement, the community, a lot of the things that Catherine kind of set up and talked about with the experimentation. Place, so that social learning meeting, how do we utilize that space? And then the platform, so you have different items coming into play, tools, resources, and knowledge. And then with inclusivity.
Kind of from a broad side of inclusivity, this is more from the physical environment, a building, if you will. Because budgets are getting tighter with government, especially libraries, the dollar just doesn't go as far. We're working with clients that are looking at ways to share the space or share shared amenities with another function, particularly government functions. So there might be a library that's designed with community center, a library that's designed with governmental offices, and sometimes even with police and fire. Not necessarily the best mix, but so that way they can share lobby space, common restrooms, and maybe even some meeting rooms and things like that. There again, it's to save money because we just don't have unlimited budgets. But you don't have unlimited budgets. No, and we do have limited budgets. So again, when we work with you, so that's some of the things that we really need to consider and talk about if there's that opportunity. Doesn't necessarily mean that everybody can do that.
Mm-hmm. So with inclusivity, we really want to talk about accessibility as well, and that really ranges. It's not just ADA. Obviously, that's a huge focus in design. It's something that we are always dealing with. But in addition to that, we're talking about neurodiversity, we're talking about age, culture, all of those items, and we want to figure out ways to integrate that into the design. We also know that libraries a lot of times are kind of first responders for certain things. So we're supporting human services, food distribution, emergency shelters, all sorts of things like that as well. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. If you're looking at something like neurodiversity, sometimes, all it means is that somebody wants to have a private space. So you're using one of your study rooms, you might have the lights off, you might have some music playing. So those are different ways that people can utilize the space. And accessibility, again, that's something that we deal with every day. There are ADA guidelines that are obviously law. Outside of that, we're also looking to go above and beyond to make sure that these spaces are usable by anybody. And another focus with multi-generational items. So, here you can see a children's area next to a teen area, and we have kind of like different sizes of openings so that you really are including everybody in those spaces.
I should have mentioned this earlier, but we're talking to a group of people that represent all the classes of libraries, except I think there aren't any Class 1 libraries here. But, so we have a lot of small libraries, physically in terms of space and size, to large libraries that are really big, multiple floors. And so this isn't, this is meant to be a broad-based discussion. One size certainly doesn't fit all, but a lot of the characteristics do apply, and just how we have to apply them for the different size buildings. But adaptability, that's a key word for designing in the future, is how do we adapt to all the multiple changes that we know are going to be happening. Since we've seen so much happen in the last 20 years, how do we account for that? But so how do we do that? Like I mentioned before, we try to put the expensive spaces around the perimeter, or at least along one wall if that's possible, or two. So that way we don't design something that's in the way of future growth or future uses or the versatility of the space that it needs. And so that's one of the key things that we need to look at. And then part of that is also multifunctional spaces that have multiple uses, especially in a smaller library where your meeting room is also your makerspace, which is potentially maybe any other function that may happen in the library, children's programming, children's story time. And so it's really serving multiple uses and multi-generational as well. And so adaptability, versatility is key.
Yes, and so with those spaces, we're not just looking at where are we placing them. So, a lot of times we're seeing restrooms, programming rooms, anything that does have to be in a separate space. Those are against the walls. In addition, though, we're also looking at what the finishes are, what the furniture is, how you're going to use those. So, for instance, if you have maybe a story time room that's doubling as a makerspace room, we want to make sure that you have resilient flooring. You're not going to have carpet because you want it to be cleanable, but then we have to balance that with the acoustics as well. And then with furniture, so there's a huge difference between modular and mobile furniture and also movable furniture. So modular furniture, it's individual pieces that you can reconfigure. We're seeing this a lot, particularly with circulation desks. So we really are not doing a lot of built-in furniture, like built-in casework anymore. Right now we're designing a library where we'll be doing a 3-part circ desk. And that way in the future, if they want to remove part of it or move it around, that they are able to do that a lot easier than you would normally. And then with other furniture pieces, so we've got modular, mobile, so things that are on casters. I know you guys there's been a lot of talk about shelving on casters, things like that. That is a higher cost that we're continuously looking to kind of, where can we use this, especially in children's areas. I think that's super common right now. And then the other thing is furniture that can be moved but is stationary. So I have a lot of conversations about certain spaces like an atrium space that we designed recently where we really want it to feel high end, but they're also using it for, they might have musicians come in on certain days. So is that furniture light enough that somebody can pick it up and move it if they want to, but it is also in a set location, you feel like this is where it's supposed to stay to some extent. And then another thing that we're seeing is light fixtures that are independent of stacks. Like they're not going in the same direction necessarily, or you can also do lighting that's integrated. So those are 2 options. It just kind of depends on what the other space items are. All right. I'm going to talk about.
There it is. I have to see it. Yeah, this is just a sample of what we were talking about earlier, trying to put spaces on the outside walls or around the perimeter, and so it stays out of the way of the main space. And so these are a series of smaller meeting rooms. Actually, the first space is a gaming room. It could be anything else as well. There's a podcast room and then 2 small meeting rooms. And so that's one of the things that I'm sure you're all aware of and needing, if you don't have them already, is multiple private, smaller, 1-person, 2-person, 4-person meeting rooms. That people need still have some quiet, contemplative work areas. Mm-hmm. They might camp out there all day. Sometimes they're that nice. But that's okay. That's what you want them in the library for.
Yeah. So here's another example. This is an older library, but I want to note that it has a lot of the same concepts that we're talking about. So there are certainly some built-in pieces, right? We have some built-in shelving. We obviously have a partial wall here in the front with some computers, but you can see that the furniture is movable, a lot of things on casters, so that anybody can be moving these items around, and it also makes it easy in the future for you to adjust things. So I think that something people get hung up on is like, we have to do a full renovation or X, Y, and Z, and like, we can do a lot with furniture, even the existing furniture that you have. This is another example of a similar space. So again, everything in this space is really easy to be reconfigured. Obviously, we talk about where we're going to put things, and we have intense discussions about that with you and with your staff, with patrons, whoever you would like to have involved in that process. And we'll kind of come up with a set layout. Maybe we have a couple of different layouts even to kind of give you an example of, okay, if you were to move these things, what would you do with that? But in the future, you can always easily change. Another thing that we are particularly seeing are gathering areas. So a lot of times, we're kind of calling these like living room spaces. They are very much on the residential side. It's supposed to feel really warm and welcoming. It's supposed to bring community members together, of all generations. So it's not just adults, it's not teens, it's not children, it's for everybody. And really this is to exchange information and have some of those connections. And some of the features that we're seeing in these spaces are soft seating, fireplaces. Fireplaces have become a lot more common, I think, in libraries as pricing has gone down with something like that, and we can use more of a digital fireplace.
Yeah, we used to do real fireplaces. Designed those about 30 years ago, and then we went to the gas log fireplace, and now we're all the way to digital, like Wendy's.
So really focusing on having these spaces be a comfortable, warm space. I think this is more on the traditional library side that we would maybe used to see. So, tables and chairs, spaces to really cozy up with a book, maybe do an activity with somebody. So that's just one of the main types of spaces that we're seeing. But those are kind of spread throughout the spaces that we have within the library, right? So here's an example of a teen area. So you've got some computers, they've got, a variety of books, but then you also have kind of a meeting area where people can be sitting and doing homework or maybe chatting about something. So we're kind of placing those little gathering areas throughout the space. Here's another one. This is outside of kind of the early childhood area. So a lot of things that we're looking at here, like you might have families who are kind of transitioning in or out of that space. So if you have a parent who has multiple children, maybe you have one younger child and somebody who's a little bit older, you might have to put on your coat or, do something like that. So having a space where you can pop down and do that before moving into another is really important. You can also see maybe older kids are waiting for their younger siblings out here. They don't want to go into that children's space. So different items like that as well.
Could I just add?
Yeah.
When we see these different age groups, and how do we accommodate them and how do we design for them, there again, the one-size-fits-all model really doesn't work either. With a larger library, you can have defined and actually dedicated space for different age groups, but when we're working with a library that's maybe only 3,000 or 4,000 square feet, we probably use furniture and shelving to define spaces just because it's so small, and then you start really making it feel more claustrophobic. So we do have, there are different models out there, and so we don't say every age group has to go in its own room. That's not true. And so we just need to, and then every library is unique for the community, and so we talk about what those needs are and then design for that, whether they're in rooms or not.
Yeah, and again, commonly we do have very open spaces where we're trying to keep specific rooms maybe on the edge. We have seen a move specifically with younger kids. When we have a children's area, we might kind of block that off from the rest of the library, but still have it be very open on the interior. And one of the other things that we're doing, outside of using shelving, but also having different heights of furniture and things like that too.
Oh, just one. Well, and just, since we're talking about the future of libraries, do we see any differences or any changes in, who's coming to the library in terms of age group? No, we don't. But we never know what to expect in the future. So we're still planning for children, teens, adults, and maybe even some other, if it's large enough, tweens, they might have their own area too. But so we still anticipate, those needs being true for the next 20 years or so. But we've been wrong before.
All right, so another feature. So we all know that technology is rapidly advancing. I think you guys have probably seen, there's a lot of graphs out there that are like straight line and then it goes really, really high. So obviously we have a lot of different items that are being integrated now, whether it's, something basic like laptop checkouts, digital streaming, interactive things like VR, 3D printing, all of those items. So again, one of the big things with this is additional power. So we're continuously looking at how do we incorporate that, because a lot of the existing libraries just were not designed with enough power. So some of the things that we're doing for that, one, we always try to work off of the power that you do have. Typically in a renovation, we do not want to add floor boxes, so outlets in the floor. Unless we have to. We would like to when we can, but it can be kind of costly. So we really want to look at where those items are, especially when we're talking about your computers or your circ desks, items like that. And then in addition, looking at, when we do new walls, if you have existing outlets, like where can we place furniture so that you have those access points. And then in addition, there are a lot of other options that are kind of coming out in the design industry where it's kind of like a very fancy extension cord is what I'll call it. So you might have some sort of pole that has multiple plugs on it. There are options now from like Herman Miller and Steelcase where you have kind of like a mobile unit almost that you can charge and then take with you. So we're looking at those for libraries as well. Again, if we have the budget to put in actual power sources, we always like to do that, but we also try to think of alternative ways. But I think with technology in general, we never know where it's going, and really the reason that you have this, right, is the availability of these tools would otherwise not be accessible for people. So we're also looking at how we can store these items, so that can have a huge impact on, if you do have built-in storage or what types of spaces that we're doing. So really it's more of a library of things, right? Like people are now starting to rent out. I mean, you could rent out a mower. We have no idea what you guys are doing in the future. So just trying to think of like, how do we store those items? And also this has an impact, like I said, on spaces. So for instance, podcast studios, different items like that where they're a little bit different in the design. Like we might be doing a green screen. We might have more integrated, you have different ways that you're recording things. So lots of different items with that as well.
Can't see what I'm looking at. Okay, there it is. Oh yeah, this is a good example of a makerspace, and I don't know if you can see in there's a folding wall that can subdivide it into two rooms, if you will, and that's, part of the versatility and flexibility of the space that we're trying to incorporate. A makerspace, I've seen some makerspaces in the middle of the library. I don't know if that's really good in terms of space utilization, but, if you keep even those, nearby the entryway, well seen, that people can see the excitement that's going on. And these rooms are designed from no-tech, low-tech to high-tech, and anything in between. Lots of power infused as well as technology infused. And so, like I said, and I know I'm repeating myself, versatility, adaptability, change. Don't forget about that. And so you'll hear about that from your architect when you start designing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some examples in this photo. So power from the ceiling, again, this is a really good way for us to integrate new power sources. It's a lot easier. It may not look as nice, but in some place like a makerspace, it's really beneficial. And again, easy to adjust furniture. So we have furniture that's on casters here. And typically for a space like this, we would give you a couple of different layouts. So you might have kind of like an individual work situation, or you might have a speaker situation. And we'll kind of develop some different layouts for that, just to show you how you can rearrange the furniture within the space and how many people you can fit. Some other examples, we're seeing a lot more esports and gaming. This is really across the board. We're seeing this a lot in education spaces, and we're starting to see it in libraries as well. So developing those spaces, making sure that you have space for those, children, tweens, teens, making sure that it's visible and, you're giving them the tools that they need, but it's also, it's a space where they can be active.
Sustainability, you've been hearing a lot about this probably for the last 15, 20 years. It is important. And as we design buildings, we want to be as, good stewards of the environment as we possibly can. You've heard of LEED and Green Globes and other programs out there to kind of grade your building and how sustainable or how well it performs. In the use of fossil fuels and power, and so that's really important to consider. The good thing is the building codes are kind of adopting a lot of those lower level measures from LEED and Green Globes, and so our buildings are becoming more sustainable all the time anyway, because it's a cost to have your project become actually LEED certified or LEED accredited, but yet we can follow the guidelines real well and to make your building as green as possible. And some of the components there is obviously LED lighting. We're trying to use maybe more effective and efficient mechanical systems rather than using something that burns fossil fuels. If it does, it's high efficiency. Or do we do something else? We want to COVID taught us a lot about air filtrations and air changes and safety protocols, and so a lot of that's been kind of incorporated now too. Well, just for anticipation, because will it happen again? In that likelihood. Don't want to see that. But anyway, another really highly sustainable practice is to use an old building. The pre-existing building. That's about as sustainable as you can get. Now, it's got to be a building that works well for a library. We're always happy to take a look at a building to see if it would really work and be adaptable to a library. So you want to make sure that you just don't buy anything. So anyway, so those are just some of the components. I don't know if the next slide is mine. Yeah, just, we're looking at when we do build buildings, new libraries, we're looking at a lot of daylighting. We're going to talk a little bit more about biophilic design, which is building really responds to. We're looking at natural materials, and the materials that we buy and specify are typically natural materials or materials that have a high recycled content, so like particularly metals. And so also we're looking at site sustainability ideas as well with natural plantings, rain gardens. And so if you have a site that has that capability or large enough, that's one of the things that we'll be talking about. Don't have to necessarily file LEED, but we can do incorporate a lot of those features. Oh, biophilic. There we go.
Yes, so kind of stemming off of sustainability, I don't know how many of you have heard this word, if this is something that you guys, okay. I don't know how much it gets talked about outside of the design community, but biophilic design is basically this idea, right, that everybody is naturally drawn to a nature-based environment. So that's, spaces that have blue for, the sky and green. These are things that we deal with constantly as designers and we're constantly thinking about. So this spans every type of space that we work on, whether it's healthcare, education, library design, anything like that. So some of the things that we really focus on are, again, indoor-outdoor flow and views of nature, natural light. Like those are the biggest things that you can do in order to have this biophilic design incorporated into your space. Some of the other things that we can do as well on more the finishes side. So we do try to incorporate natural materials like wood, stone, and even bring in plants when we can. All of those items too can be we might not always do actual wood. We might do a laminate that's a wood look. Those things don't necessarily make a difference on the health benefits of biophilic design. So here's a couple of examples. I don't know if you want to go over this one.
Oh, no, you can.
I'll just keep
Go
going. So some examples in this one, so you can see that we have a lot of daylighting and natural views. We're really bringing in the outside. We have some stone material on the fireplace. And then this is a great option too. If you have space outdoors and we can link together like an outdoor reading patio, a garden, anything like that, that's really helpful. Here are some of the outcomes though, because you guys are probably like, okay, biophilic design, what does that really mean though? How does that impact us? So this can really make your visitors feel a lot more happy and relaxed. So maximizing daylight can actually enhance learning speed by 25%. So that's another reason why when we're doing like a study room, for instance, we want to put it on the exterior wall. And usually when we're doing a study room, we have glass on the front. I know Catherine was saying we love glass. We do love glass for certain reasons. So that way you can still get that natural light from the outside in, but you're able to kind of give it to multiple people as well. So that's a big one as well. Plants and greenery. This is always a conversation that we have because some libraries have a lot of plants already. They might have a good system for utilizing, how do you make sure that they're all watered? Other times it's a little bit more difficult. So I feel like a common conversation that we have is, can we do a green wall? What does that look like? How can we work with maybe a local place to have somebody come in and take care of that? Because plants can actually boost creativity by nearly 50%, which I think that a lot of people are using the library as some place to be creative as well, right? And then these items can also help increase staff performance by 10 to 25%. So that's something that we're always thinking about. We never want to forget about the staff who are also making this space work, right? Because if it's a human-centered design, you want to have your staff also be available for any of your patrons. One of the really big things, though, why we really want to do this is that it helps foster an emotional attachment and create a sense of membership and ownership in that space for any of the patrons using it. And this is an interesting one because it might not seem like, oh no, that's like super important for us necessarily, but it should be if it isn't. And the other thing is this can also kind of go back to some funding things, right? So one of the issues that we frequently deal with, again, you guys maybe are going out for a bond, you have a vote, something like that. So we want to make sure that your patrons feel that sense of ownership, and we're continuously trying to find new ways to do that. Again, biophilia can come in a lot of different aspects. So it doesn't necessarily need to be just blue and green, or it doesn't need to have like leaves and tons of plants. Like we can do this in a lot of different ways depending on what the space calls for. So some other examples. Here we have a photo where obviously lots of natural light coming in. We have this dock-inspired stage for the children's reading area. And then we have water-inspired carpet tile there as well. And then the mural. So, something fun like this can also be an aspect of biophilia.
Okay, so what does this mean for a building? And so this is kind of a basic recipe of the framework of what to look for in either designing a new building and what to think about, or even maybe trying to purchase a pre-existing building and what do we need to look for? Well, basically, if you can get a building that has a structural grid of at least 30 foot by 30 foot, that's a good start. Could be a little bit bigger than that. If you want to know what the magic is between or why 30 by 30, it works out for stacks. because we're still going to be planning for shelving, whether they're on 5-foot centers or 6-foot centers, so it works out well with that. And also, the grid just happens to be a good number when it comes to designing a new building, where it's an economical size for structural steel, because a lot of the cheaper, or more, I wouldn't say cheaper, the more affordable steel sizes are in that size and for those spans, and so it's a real cost-saving measure. A raised floor, I don't know if anybody knows what a raised floor is, or if anybody has one. They're wonderful, they're great, they do cost a little bit of money, but basically they came out of the corporate world, with it's computer rooms, a lot of open office environments in the corporate side. Let's see, 911 centers, call centers, things like that. But basically, it's a floor on top of a floor. Usually, it was used primarily to house wiring, lots and lots and lots of wiring, data wiring, power wiring. But it's also used now, when we use it, to distribute the air, heated air or cooled air, which is much more comfortable. So but the main thing is it allows maximum adaptability for floor outlets for heating and cooling. You can move them around. Outlets for data and for power, you can move those around too. They're a 2x2 tile that screw down. You can unscrew it and rearrange to your heart's content. And it's designed that it can support 500 pounds per square foot, which is more than enough for shelving at any height. Of course, we don't go too high in shelving these days, but it can support anything you want to put on it. And so it's a real fantastic way to get better air distribution, power distribution, and it answers that adaptability and versatility issue that we've been harping on all day. So it's really a good thing. And if we can design for that, fantastic. I mean, in a new building, you want to design for it, because typically you need about 18 inches more of depth from your floor level down to the bottom of the slab, which used to be where your floor was. If you had a single story building, your slab on grade, well, that drops down a little bit to accommodate all that. So wonderful thing to think about. It can be put into an existing building, but you typically have to raise the floor up 18 inches, and then how do you account for that? Entering the building and things like that with existing doors and windows. It can be done, but a little more problematic. And then again, we're looking at, if you're designing a new building, think about expansion and growth down the line. You want to be able to, don't design yourself into a corner. You want to be able to plan that expansion in the future easily. That it makes sense. And the interior walls and mechanical, electrical systems are designed to be as flexible as possible. That's an easy thing to say. It's very difficult to do, so it does take a lot of thought and pre-planning to be able to do that, but it can be very cost-effective if you think about it correctly and plan for it early. Oh, here's just a sample of that access flooring, just so you can see that. You can see one of the panels is taken out of the floor. There's a little round disc on the far right side. That's the air distribution center, or a little vent, and it is adjustable, so you can turn it off or open it up for more. So it's individual comfort control. And then the other one that's just to the left of that, underneath the desk, is a data power outlet. So if you don't want it there, you can rearrange it. As Chloe mentioned before, getting power into these old buildings is not easy. Either you come down an existing wall, or you come down a column like these, if you can, or you have a power pole, in locations that look hideous. Everybody hates those things, and for good reason. Or you can spend a lot of money, and you can cut, trenches in your concrete and for floor boxes, which are fixed. And if you want to change, well, there it sits, and now it's not useful anymore. We have to get the extension cord out. Or we're married to that location and we're not going to move. So, that's not the best. So these floors really answer a lot of those questions, and if you can plan that in. And if you're going to budget it, figure $40 to $50 a square foot added onto the construction cost, just FYI.
Yeah, so again, the cost of something like that, it's really helpful if you can do it, especially in new builds. A lot of renovations that we do, it's not an option. So again, we're looking at some of the alternatives of what we can do and where we can add additional outlets. Another thing I didn't mention earlier is that a lot of times we're using furniture as a way to bring in additional outlets. So if you have a floor box, for instance, we might place a table directly on that existing floor box and then actually have power within the table where you can plug in your laptop or anything like that. So there's lots of of different ways that we kind of work on those items, and it just depends on what the needs are, and kind of go through that. So space types. I mean, you guys probably know a lot of these items. These are kind of the primary programming spaces that we're looking at. How do we do things for different spaces? So we talked about like the living room, we talked about multi-purpose rooms. You might have quiet rooms. We're seeing more and more like sensory rooms. So that's another thing that we look at. How are we integrating that into the space? Where are those placed? Who's using them? Other examples like different telephone rooms or booths. So we can do this either as a built-in solid wall if that's the preference, but really for something like this, we're typically looking at a furniture solution. So those are really nice. You can get them a lot less expensively now. And what's great about that is if you have somebody who's maybe, an entrepreneur or somebody like that, or somebody who's maybe, working in the library that day, that they can go on a phone call and it's completely silent. It has a great acoustical value and you won't be able to hear anything outside of that space. So those are wonderful, definitely something that we look into more and more. We also talked about maker spaces and different labs like that as well.
And just to say for that previous slide, those are current spaces that we're working with, and what will the future bring? How are those spaces going to change or evolve? So we're trying to anticipate what those could potentially be. But suffice to say, they're probably going to need power, and data, and flexibility. Age group, they're going to talk about this before, but we're still accommodating the age groups, and they're going to maybe even subdivided in from these three main categories of kids, teens, and adults. And they're going to either separated or not, and we still see this being a very common element in libraries for the next 20 years or so. So we're planning for that.
Mm-hmm. We also need to think about spaces for strategic goals. So depending on what your community looks like, these may differ, right? So we might have a language center somewhere where if you have a lot of like refugees or immigrants in your area, they might be coming here to learn English. You just never know. So providing those types of spaces, having a business and career center is typically very important. We always have those types of items kind of throughout. And social service centers as well. So these are things to think about as we kind of move forward.
Yeah, and destination features, spaces in libraries. They could be the maker space or a culinary kitchen. There's now more of that we're seeing, which is kind of neat to see. And they're kind of pop up, if you will. They kind of bring in their own equipment, but they're again like a maker space. You can do anything in them. Could be in a community room or a big meeting room, or in a cyber cafe, because you could just scroll through the next, such as this, where it's a space that can accommodate really any function, kind of like in a public area, lots of lighting, lots of power, countertops and sink to work with. Here's another like a tinker space, maker space, where anything can happen, and you can set the power rails in the ceiling. Lots of biophilic design features too, with outdoor connection, to nature through the windows, lots of natural daylighting, and the floors are meant for anything to happen on them. You can dirty them up and then clean up, and then flexible furniture, and then you support amenities in the space, storage, and countertop and sink.
Okay, so talked a lot about the types of spaces, what we're seeing, right? Okay, but you guys are the ones who are in these spaces day in and day out. So these are really things we need to look at your community and your people, and you guys are the ones who know best, right? So there's a lot of different people who might be coming into the library space. So we're really looking for you guys to kind of help us with that information so that we can make sure that we're designing properly for them. So, we know that a lot of times parents or grandparents are coming in and reading with their children. So we need to think about what are we providing for them? Is it a comfortable chair? Is it a love seat? Do you need Do you need one adult chair and one children's chair that sit next to each other? So we're going to talk through all of those types of options with you. Same thing for all different types. Like you might have students coming in who are studying, so we need study rooms for those. What does that include? Is it power? Do you need really adjustable lighting? And then outside of kind of the age ranges, right? Again, we were talking about kind of like job seekers, immigrants, entrepreneurs, retirees, like they all have different needs. So those are things that we're going to be reviewing with you and see like what makes sense.
And just to echo that, the library is designed to reflect your community, maybe from an architectural sense, from the exterior, but inside anything goes. Plan for that. And I think there was a discussion you had last night when you were out in town. There's so many problems that kind of come into the library, and how does the library respond to people that are not doing the right thing in the library, and how do you accommodate that, or how do you deal with that? And so as a library is a space for all, it's welcoming to all. But sometimes the bad comes with the good, and then how do you deal with that? And that is always, a problem that you have to address, with security, or and how do you do that, and what's right and what is not right to do, or what can you do, or what is allowed by law, So there's all those things that you have to try to deal with and wrestle with, and have policies for.
All right, so our big focus is how do you create a balanced design? So we really want to make sure that we're customizing the experience of the spaces for your patrons to go along with your programming, to go along with your community, and think about the different activities that you have going on, right? But we need to make sure that there's flexibility, that in the future you're able to change it. Typically, libraries don't get redesigned. It's usually maybe every 20 years, I would say. That's what we typically see. And that's obviously not best, right? Because things don't change on a 20-year increment. So we have to make sure that we're providing a space where, 5-10 years from now, like we can't design for that. We can design to make sure that it's adaptable. So how do we do that? How can we ensure future flexibility? And a lot of this is having a variety of acoustic zones and seating choices and spatial configurations that, again, can be easily moved throughout the space depending on what you need in the future. Again, though, this is all very community focused. Every library is unique, and we know that there is no one size fits all. So as design professionals, a lot of our job is looking to you as you guys know your libraries. You're the experts on your own library. So we really look to you and have a lot of conversations about what that looks like.
But we ask the questions, so we try to pull that information out of you. And just to wrap up, and before a library design starts, there's 4 kind of key elements that we look at, what we call in pre-design. We want to conduct, we want to know what the building is all about, or what the new building is going to be about, so we're going through that process, but what the site needs are going to be, and perform a needs assessment for your library. And that's another process all in and of itself we're not going to get into. We ask a lot of what if questions and start thinking about those. We prioritize empathy and real world design and over perfection, which is important. And we want to develop a clear plan from the needs to project reality.
Yep, and a lot of that is going off of what Catherine was talking about, right? Like, we are doing a lot of iteration, we're talking about these things, assessing them, and so community engagement plays a really vital role in this. So obviously, our job is to have conversations with you guys. We're going to talk to you on a one-on-one basis. We're going to talk to your staff, get feedback on those items. But then we're also going to involve your community. So this can look a lot of different ways. That might mean that we're sending out a digital survey. It might mean that we have 50 people in a room and we're looking at finishes for the space, or we're looking at a block diagram of how do you maybe lay out these spaces. So those are always things that we're talking about. And that also helps with advocacy for these types of projects, right, as we're looking to get funding. And it also helps with fundraising. But the most important thing for us is that it helps get feedback and really help make those decisions to ensure that it fits for your library.
I think that is it. We're all set. We do have is that on the handout?
Yes. So
There's a handout that has a QR code. We did a podcast on space utilization assessments and what we do for those. If you wanted to listen to that, if you haven't heard it already. I don't know if we have another one or two. We have several on our website.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so we're open for any questions you may have, and hopefully we have answers for those.